All right, everybody, I think we're going to get started. If you're ready, I'm ready.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I want to thank the Blount Mansion for hosting this Constitution Week event. The Blount Mansion is a Knoxville treasure. Knoxville is a special place, and I think the more we study our local history, the more we can appreciate just how special it is. I also want to thank those in attendance here at the Blount Mansion Visitor Center and those listening in online for coming to the talk today. Here are two books I would recommend for further reading on today's topic. I'm not going to be able to cover everything in the time we have. You can purchase Masterson's biography of Blount in the Blount Mansion's gift shop. And you can order Melton's book on Amazon. Both of these books cover a lot of the details of Blount's impeachment that I can only skim over today. These are recent news headlines. You can check these out. House Republicans agree on something, impeachment inquiry into Biden. Representative Nancy Mace, Republican from South Carolina, says she wants to subpoena everybody. Hunter Biden, the bookkeeper, business partners. I would like to see more whistleblowers come forward. LA Times, Kevin McCarthy's impeachment inquiry proves there's only one political party of revenge, the GOP. On my way over here today, just listening to the radio, hearing congressmen talking about 4 witnesses coming forward with testimony about Biden. And it was interesting, one of the congressmen said that not one of those 4 witnesses that was brought forth to testify before Congress, not one of those witnesses thought there was enough evidence to impeach President Biden. Impeachment is on the tongues of U.S. congressmen and women again. House Republicans are moving to impeach President Biden, and it's worth noting that the Founding Fathers included impeachment in the Constitution to protect democracy from the threat of corrupt politicians. They did not intend impeachment to be used as a political weapon for one party to try to destroy another party. And anytime politicians threaten to impeach anyone, we should pause as a nation and reflect on the case of William Blount. He was the first U.S. politician in our history to face impeachment. Blount's impeachment can put things in perspective for us today, and there are lessons we can draw from Blount's impeachment to inform our current decisions about Republicans' move to impeach Biden. William Blount had a complicated relationship with the United States Constitution. He was an ardent Federalist after the American Revolution. He may have signed the Constitution. George Washington, one of the leading Federalists, appointed Blount to govern the Southwest Territory around 1790. But in less than a decade, the Constitution Blount had supported became the instrument that ended his political career and eventually his life. Blount was the first government official to be impeached under Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution. Does anyone in the room have any hot takes on impeachment right now? Have you been listening to the news? Have you formed opinions about the process of impeachment? Before we get into Blount's story today, do you believe we should be able to impeach politicians to remove them from office? Or do you feel that impeachment just opens the door for politicians to attack one another for reasons that have little to do with the common interests of our nation? Right now, I'm interested. What's your take on impeachment?
There needs to be a system of checks and balances.
Okay, it's part of a system of checks and balances by which Americans check the power of our elected officials, maybe prevent them from becoming corrupt. What do the rest of you think? Yeah, Brian?
If they won't impeach Ted Cruz, the bar must be pretty low. I mean, like, it's sort of, it really is. Currently, our government follows this tradition of only using it in cases of extremes. I have my own opinions about the Biden impeachment as being a political tool to rile up a base of people, but before this, we haven't really seen it used in that way.
Okay. Been 60 cases have been where impeachment trials have been held in our history, and only 21 people have been impeached. So it's not that often that impeachment is raised, although it feels like in the last 10 years, it's been raised a lot, has it not? What about people over here? What are your opinions of impeachment?
It can be used for the parties. I mean, that was the whole, I work here as Joseph, but that was sort of the whole thing that happened with William Blount. They said, maybe we shouldn't be able to impeach senators, and that's the reason they haven't done it again, because it does sort of toe that line between political parties and just over-swinging the parties to one side. Or
Yeah, and thank you. And we're definitely going to talk about the impeachment of senators today, because Blount is a senator when he's impeached, and he is expelled.
Yeah.
But then the Senate says, wait, for the rest of us, let's close this loophole. Does that fact make you skeptical about impeachment? Does it make you cynical? It does.
Yeah,
good.
To some extent. Yeah.
We've got some cynicism in it. That's good. That's good for a democracy. That's not bad, everybody. That's what, folks at home, some cynicism has been expressed about impeachment and the impeachment process. That's a good thing. That's a fair thing for our democracy. We must debate these, must talk about these things. And whenever we prevent our citizens from talking about history, even parts of history we don't like, we threaten our democracy. Let me drive that point home. All right, let's talk about Blount's federalism and the United States Constitution. In 1787, leading American politicians called for a convention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to address problems with the Articles of Confederation, such as who could own what land in the backcountry, what protocols could be put in place to admit new states to the Union. American leaders such as James Madison and John Adams and our own William Blount ended up creating an entirely new constitution for a new system of government. The states ratified the Constitution in 1788. The Constitution empowered the new federal government to regulate settlement in Western lands, and it authorized the federal government to make treaties with Native Americans, both of which are particularly relevant to Tennessee. President George Washington and Secretary of War Henry Knox appointed Blount as the governor of the newly formed Southwest Territory in 1790, as thanks for being a loyal Federalist during the constitutional debates. Blount had motivated people in his home state of North Carolina to ratify the Constitution. And that's an interesting and complex history. As a territorial governor, Blount was supposed to support the interests of the federal government in the region. Blount was also appointed superintendent of Indian Affairs in the South. Washington and Knox expected Blount, a fellow Federalist, to work to prevent costly wars with neighboring Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Creek nations. Blount may have been a Federalist, but unlike Washington, he supported westward expansion at any cost. Washington and Knox were particularly worried that Native Americans would ally with the Spanish and spark an international war. While Washington had been a surveyor and he had speculated in some western lands himself, Blount was an even greater land speculator than George Washington. Blount believed the benefits of getting access to more and more land outweighed the risks of war. Blount very quickly fell out of favor with the Federalists soon after they appointed him as governor of the Southwest Territory. And if you're interested in reading more about Blount's role as governor, then I shamelessly encourage you all to pre-order this new book on Amazon. I wrote a chapter in this book on William Blount. It'll be the latest word on Blount. How did Blount fall out of favor with Federalists? Well, it has to do with this historic marker that's located not far from here. You can all perhaps read it. If not, I'll read it to you. It's about the Treaty of Holston, 250 yards east near the mouth of First Creek. William Blount, governor of the territory south of the River Ohio, on July 2nd, 1791, signed a treaty with 48 chiefs of the Cherokee. It ceded a tract of land east of Clinch River, extending approximately from Greenville 80 miles southwest, and included the present Knox County. I think it's interesting that they refer to people in this region as people south of the River Ohio. I don't know a single Knoxvillian that identifies with the Ohio River in any way, shape, or form in 2023. But they did at one time. That was where a lot of goods were brought down into central Tennessee from the Ohio River, from where I was born and raised up in Pennsylvania. President Washington, a Federalist, ordered Blount to meet with the Cherokee to solidify a peace treaty in 1791. Blount was supposed to do two things with the Treaty of Holston. Washington wanted him to confirm a 1785 treaty between the Cherokee and the United States, in which the former agreed to stop fighting and to give up some of their territorial lands in Cherokee country in exchange for the federal government's protection for their remaining territories. And this is a theme throughout Native American history, is treaty after treaty after treaty in which the United States government agrees to protect, and then they allow westward settlers to do whatever they want. And so this is what Blount was supposed to do in 1791 at the Treaty of Holston. But at the Treaty of Holston, near James White's fort, Blount ignored Washington's policy of appeasement and insisted that the Cherokee were a conquered people who had lost all their rights and privileges to their lands. Instead of paying the Cherokee what they wanted for their land, Blount only agreed to an annual stipend of $1,000 in federal funds if the Cherokee agreed to cede all claims to the region east of the Clinch River and north of a line through Kingston to the North Carolina border. Some of the Cherokee who were not present at the meeting were angry about the cession of land, and they petitioned Washington to do something about the matter. They wrote to Washington and said, "We are willing to go to war over this." And here's Washington, like, "I told you, Blount, I expressly told you to prevent this from happening." Washington was pissed that Blount had deliberately ignored his instructions. So Blount relocated his governor's headquarters to a new area he named Knoxville in 1792 in an effort to get back in the good graces of Secretary Knox, President Washington, and other Federalists. That's why we're named Knoxville, people, because Blount wanted to get back into good standing with the Federalists. Tennessee statehood further divided Blount from the Federalists. When Blount became governor of the Southwest Territory in 1790, he didn't call for an election of a legislature. And this was strange. The region had enough white male landowners to establish an assembly. But Blount did not submit the paperwork to the federal government to make this happen. He didn't want a legislature to interfere with his plans to acquire more and more land for himself. After facing pressure from local bigwigs such as John Sevier, Blount finally agreed to share power. The first full General Assembly of the Southwest Territory met in Knoxville on August 26, 1794. That's 4 years after Blount was given power over the region. That's 4 years. On June 29, 1795, the Assembly voted to check the population in the area to see if there was indeed enough white male landowners to form a state. The Assembly expected things to move forward, so they further recommended that Blount call for 5 delegates from each of the 11 counties in the territory to form a constitutional convention. Already, people were thinking about Tennessee's first constitution. The results of the census came in on November 28, 1795. There were over 77,000 white male landowners in the region, well over the required 60,000 to pursue statehood. So Blount officially called for a convention to meet right here in Knoxville on January 11, 1796. Blount and the Territorial Assembly were not acting by the strict protocols established by the Federalists in the Northwest Ordinance for the Northwest Territory that came before the Southwest Territory. They were supposed to get approval from the federal government before moving ahead with the Constitutional Convention. And I hope our listeners at home and those of us in this audience understand, Federalists want more power in the federal government. Federalists want less power in the state's government. So of course they would say, look, before you become a state, you have to apply to us in the federal government and get our approval before you even start this process. And don't forget that the Federalists were at the height of their power at this time. They had just gotten the Constitution ratified by the states. That's a big win for the Federalists. Blount, ever ambitious, wanted to adopt the Constitution, elect officials, and then submit the whole package to the federal government before asking for permission, following the time-honored tradition of it's better to ask for forgiveness. So that's what they did on February 6, 1796. Blount approved the new Constitution right here in Knoxville, and they settled on the state's new name, Tennessee. John Sevier was elected as the first governor. William Blount and Andrew Jackson were elected to represent Tennessee in the nation's capital as senator and congressman. Blount even went so far as to publicly declare the Southwest Territory, quote unquote, has terminated. Famous mission accomplished quote here. All this local authority and state power rubbed Federalists, including President Washington and Secretary of War Henry Knox, the wrong way. They had worked hard to establish the new federal Constitution as the law of the land. Federalists saw Blount and the Tennessee Assembly as subverting the power of the new federal government. And it is new, right? They're sensitive about any threat to the federal government. When the United States Congress took up the issue of admitting Tennessee to the Union in May 1796, sorry, William Blount, it's not enough for you to stand up and declare Tennessee a state. The United States government actually does have to approve that. And when Congress went to take up this issue, Federalists opposed Tennessee becoming a state. You can understand why. Congressmen were only supposed to check to make sure that new state constitutions broadly upheld American ideals. This check was supposed to be largely symbolic, and everybody understood that the norm here, the standard is that states are going to apply and Congress is going to rubber stamp it. But Congress debated the issue of Tennessee statehood for 2 months. This opposition rubbed Blount the wrong way, and he became an ardent anti-federalist and a staunch defender of states' rights. Blount gave up trying to get the Federalists to like him. Even though we didn't have formal political parties in this country, party politics still influenced decision-making in our national government. And when Congress did approve Tennessee's admission as a 16th state in the Union on June 1st, 1796, the very last day Congress was in session, Federalists reduced Tennessee's electoral votes, and they forced Tennesseans to re-elect their senators and congressmen as a final punishment. This conflict between states' rights and federal authority would define westward expansion in the United States right up to the Civil War. Blount's greed for more and more land to buy and sell also got him into hot water with leading Federalists such as Washington. Blount's greed helped motivate Federalists to impeach Blount. Blount used legal and illegal means to acquire title to so much land in what is today Tennessee, close to 3 million acres of land, that he ultimately went into debt, trying to acquire more and more and more land. Then, to get out of debt, Blount concocted a wild and desperate scheme. And people here at home and people listening, please do some research on Blount's plot. There's way more details than I can cover, even in 60 minutes. It is super fascinating, this wild, desperate scheme that he concocted for frontiersmen under his control and British forces from abroad to attack Spanish Florida and Louisiana. Once the frontiersmen and British forces had succeeded. Oh, and by the way, the whole reason he's going to frontiersmen under his control in Tennessee and to the British is because he had asked Washington and Knox to do it, and they said no. Repeatedly, over and over again, they said no. And what's interesting in those appeals, by the way, is that Blount is upfront and forthright with his self-interest. He said, look, I'm a businessman. I'm into Western land speculation, buying and selling lands, and this would be good for me. And Washington and Knox are like, no. The United States does not have much of a military, and we're not using taxpayer dollars to make you more money. So, he went to the British. That's why the British are involved in that. That shocked anybody. Where did Britain come from? Once the frontiersmen under Blount's control and British forces had succeeded in this plot, they were then to transfer those territories that they conquered over to Great Britain. Blinded by sheer greed, Blount foolishly believed that removing the Spanish threat from North America would increase the value of all the lands under his control. And selling those now safe lands would earn him a pretty penny. Imagine the real estate marketing, right? Freedom and luxury in the West, and it's safe now. We've removed the Spanish threat. That land that was worth pennies is now worth hundreds. Blount could have gotten out of debt. Unfortunately for Blount, he wrote a letter discussing this money-making scheme. Again, he's forthright. This is not done behind the curtain, as it were. Blount's writing everybody, talking about this big plot, and he's trying to get other people in on it. Like, it's going to make you money too. Get in on the ground floor of this. And one of the letters that Blount wrote discussing this money-making scheme fell into the hands of Federalist President John Adams. On July 3rd, 1797, President Adams sent the incriminating letter to both the Senate and the House, accompanied by a special message charging that Blount had sought the aid of a United States government agent and the British to seize Spanish Florida and Louisiana. Adams acted on an opinion from the Attorney General that the letter was evidence of a crime and that Blount, a senator, was liable to impeachment under the Constitution. This is why we're all here today. Now, those of you at home, those of you in the room, if you've drifted off at all, just take a second and just read this section of the United States Constitution. It pertains to impeachment. It's in the Constitution in the section related to the executive, but you'll see if you read it, it doesn't just apply to the executive. It states, the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And what I want you all to pay careful attention to is the phrasing here, all civil officers, is a big loophole, yeah? Like, you all are reading that and you're wondering, who's a civil officer? Yes? The answer is we don't know. But it sounds vague enough that we'll be able to play around with that down the road. Okay? The other thing is high crimes and misdemeanors. What counts as a high crime and misdemeanor for you? I imagine if we took a poll here, we'd get different answers from everybody in here. Right? What constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors? What can a politician in the United States be impeached for? Okay? I think it's deliberately vague to let politicians on the ground kind of sort through this mess. Throughout American history, members of Congress have most notably used impeachment against presidents and federal judges, but all federal civil officers are subject to removal by impeachment. The impeachment hearings against William Blount were the first time these constitutional powers were tested. This is the first test for this new Constitution. Is it going to pass the test? Will this Constitution stand the test of time? Is it actually a useful document? All these issues are raised around Blount's impeachment. The House and Senate responded to President Adams' request that they begin impeachment hearings on Blount in 1797. And I want you all to think about, I'm going to ask you afterwards, so I want you to think hard about this. Do you think that Adams' letter to the House of Representatives and to the Senate was politically motivated? Or do you believe that he had an obligation to the country to deal with somebody who may or may not have committed treason? And that actually does count as a high. Okay? Maybe. I want you to think about that. The House and Senate each appointed their own separate special committees to review Blount's case. Imagine as an administrator, right? You have departments at different levels forming their own committees to discuss something. The chaos that would ensue from that. But we never did this before, so the House panicked and we got to do something. Let's put together a committee. The Senate's we got to do something. Let's put together a committee. On July 7th, the House committee concluded that a senator was an impeachable official. And this committee informed the Senate that the House planned to present articles of impeachment against Blount. The House also demanded that the Senate suspend Blount from his seat and guarantee his appearance to answer the charges against him. One day prior to this, on July 6th, the Senate's committee reported that it was in favor of expelling Blount from the Senate. Imagine the House and the senators are talking to each other, right? And the members of the House were like, our committee's leaning this way. And the Senate's like, okay, yeah, we kind of agree with that. So let's get out in front of it. They admitted that they're in favor of expelling Blount from the Senate. After having been mysteriously absent from his seat in the Senate while all this is going on, Blount suddenly reappears, but he refuses to answer any questions about his behavior. Instead, he insists on his right to legal counsel. He lawyers up. Now tell me that doesn't look guilty when people do that. I'm not talking about anything I did. I want my lawyer. He must have did something wrong. He lawyered up. On July 7th, the Senate received the impeachment message from the House and granted the defense counsel's request and agreed to more time to prepare for the case. On July 8th, after hearing two of Blount's colleagues testify that the letter was indeed in Blount's handwriting, and listening to a response by defense counsel, the Senate took up its committee's report. And friends, I just want to stop here and say, that's different than today. That's different, right, than the four witnesses brought against Biden and the four witnesses each testifying that, yeah, maybe something went wrong, but not enough to impeach this man, okay? Here, with the two colleagues testifying on oath before Congress that this letter is in Blount's handwriting, that letter is pretty damning. It does smack of treason. A little bit different than today. The Senate committee publicly condemned Blount's conduct as, quote unquote, listen to this, entirely inconsistent with his public trust, and recommended that he be expelled from the Senate. This was the first time in U.S. history that a U.S. senator was expelled. The Senate expelled Blount by a vote of 25-1. Further, the Senate ordered Blount to appear on July 10th to answer the representatives' articles of impeachment. Blount gave assurances he would appear on that date. Yeah, I'll be there. And then he fled to Tennessee. This is where Blount's impeachment gets messy. The Senate tried to get Blount to be present at his impeachment trial. At the same time, the Senate declared him guilty when it voted to expel him. It's a bit like saying, you need to come to court, and oh, by the way, we already found you guilty. U.S. politicians were still getting used to the Constitution. Proper procedures were not yet in place. So all the Senate could do at this point was to try to force Blount to come to his impeachment trial at the U.S. Capitol in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Blount actually received the Senate's messengers here in Knoxville, but Blount and his loyal states' rights supporters warned the Senate against taking Blount by force. And I do wonder what was meant by that, what's behind that. I do suspect that Blount and some Tennesseans were willing to fight to protect Blount, to protect states' rights here at the end of the 1790s. I do suspect that. They have given up on federal authority very quickly and went pro-states' rights pretty whole hog. The Senate responded by starting Blount's impeachment trial without him on December 17th, 1798. This whole thing runs between 97 and 99. The impeachment process is not quick because no one knows really what they're doing at this point. They're making it up as they go along. In a surprise move that must have been made to save their own necks, the Senate voted that William Blount was not an impeachable officer because the Senate was exempt from the impeachment process. Shocking, right? The House said he was, the Senate said, we expelled him, so we kind of agreed with you, but now upon further reflection, that does bear upon us, and so no, we're going to close that loophole and ban the impeachment of senators going forward. We changed that. There have been amendments to the Constitution over the century, and we now have direct election of senators, and we can now impeach senators. One senator has been impeached in our history. William Blount died 1 year after the trials. I believe it was the trials that wore him down and killed him. Blount was the first person in U.S. history to go through the impeachment process. His name and the Blount family name that he cared about so dearly were dragged through the mud for years. And Blount was a climber who was never satisfied with staying on the lowest branch of any tree. His expulsion from the Senate put a cap on his political career. I believe this shattered Blount's psychological and physical health, and I believe this impeachment process ultimately killed him. All right, we've talked about three things today. William Blount's flirtation with the Federalists, his separation from the Federalists, and his impeachment by the Federalists. I want to now circle back to your thoughts on impeachment. Do you think Blount deserved his impeachment hearings? I think yes. I think there's enough there for the impeachment hearings to be held. I'd be interested to see if there's anyone in this room who thinks Blount was unfairly treated and the impeachment hearing should not have even happened. Okay? Are we that cynical about the process that we say the whole thing was a sham from start to finish? It's pure politics with Blount. I don't think it is, but I think it is today. I think it's a sham from start to finish. I'd be interested to hear what you all have to say about that. And I'm interested to hear what perspective or lessons you take from understanding the impeachment of Blount for understanding the impeachment of President Biden. What are your thoughts about impeachment? Has our discussion of Blount changed the way you think about impeachment? Has using Blount's specific case given you any perspective on impeachment today? It has for me. What about you all?
Anytime a states' rights person takes a loss, I think it's a win for America. So, you know.
Okay.
Maybe they didn't have the procedures set up right. I mean, it was a brand new country.
Yeah.
But not having the proper procedures doesn't mean the correct result.
Do you feel bad, Brian, that proper procedures were not in place? Do you feel bad for Blount? Are you sympathetic to Blount?
I'm
you
sympathetic.
think that you got a raw deal here?
I'm
being
sympathetic.
expelled first.
I'm sympathetic to the fact that just by getting a lawyer, he was deemed guilty of something.
Okay.
I think that goes against the foundational principles of criminal and civil law in this country. But, you know, other than that and sort of the lack of kind of proper procedure, his impeachment was based off of pretty reasonable evidence, and, you know, the Senate was saving their own asses, to put it bluntly.
Okay. Blunt
So you
talk
can get some
here.
word from it.
Blunt talk here today. What about the rest of you? Does anybody in this room feel like Blount got a raw deal? Do you feel that maybe the Senate deserves some censure for expelling him first, then calling him into the impeachment trial, and then saying, oh, by the way, after the fact, senators are exempt from this portion of the Constitution? Okay, yeah.
Well, don't you think, even if it's a principal activity at base, there's always politics.
Yes. Yes.
That's the interplay of
Yes.
politics and principle.
Yeah, and I think this is one lesson that we need to take home with us today, friends. The Constitution is not a dead letter. It is not an ancient artifact of a distant past. Okay? The Constitution empowers people to govern us. And those people are still governing us. Right? And they're people. And whenever there's people involved, there's going to be politics. Whatever that situation is, whether it's a departmental meeting at the University of Tennessee, okay, or a Senate hearing, okay, these are not robots following the Constitution blindly, without any context, without any interests of their own, okay. Of course, the fact that there are Federalists in the Senate, of course the fact that President Adams is a Federalist matters. Right? If you don't understand Tennessee statehood, it's very difficult to understand how Blount fell out with the Federalists. Learn some history. Okay? And then understand that that history bears on people's decision making. They're not, even though they're elected officials, even though they're sworn in to defend and uphold the Constitution of the United States, they're not robots. So of course politics is going to enter in here. I think that in certain cases, though, politics enters more than in other cases. Okay? Like when we're impeaching the President of the United States a month before November elections, you have to wonder, do you not? You have to wonder. I think most of us are wondering right now, like, what is really going on? And it's a little different, I think, with Blount in 1797, when Adams starts this process. It's because of this letter. It's because of Blount's scheme. It's because of all his land deals. Okay? I think there's a little bit more to it than politics, although certainly politics is involved. Any further thoughts on impeachment?
I feel like looking, modern lens, hindsight carry 2020.
Yes, hindsight is 2020.
Yeah, where it can spark a lot of cynicism when you see current affairs versus 1790s, and to say, oh, how much has changed since then.
Yes.
But the sporadicness of the way that they had to approach it is because we're a new nation, something we've never had to face before. But then also you're still trying to establish your legitimacy as a new country in the eyes of the global theater that's watching you,
right?
Trying to reorchestrate yourself back out. So I can agree from a cynical aspect that you would see it from a political motive, but it is also, there's always going to be people working within their own self-interest, but then there are going to be players in it who are trying to work legitimately through the system to establish those checks and balances to make sure that it's an actively working system and that no one's above the law. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's an important reminder that we're talking about 1797, we're not talking about 2023. Okay? And we're talking about the beginning of a nation. We're talking about the establishment of these processes. And we're talking about a new nation that is vulnerable, that is looking out to the world and wants the world's respect. And oh, by the way, in 1812 we get invaded and our capital gets burned to the ground by the British. Okay? All of that has to be taken into consideration. And I think a couple of things with the difference between 1797 and 2023. We have had time to work out these processes. We have had time as a nation to say, you know what, senators are still able to be impeached. And we should directly elect them too. Like, that's a good thing, okay? We have had time to work out this stuff, and so we should expect more, I think, from politicians in 2023. But we tend not to. As a nation, we tend to look back at the founding fathers and see them as saints, and see them as perfect individuals, high-minded angels, right? And we hold them to the highest standard. And that's wrong. They're people. They're people just like you and I, and they're trying to work out in this new constitution, see how to put it actually into practice. Kind of like when the University of Tennessee starts a new agenda, a new initiative. Well, faculty members such as myself have to figure out, how do we put that into practice? Any other thoughts here on impeachment?
I think the nature of the offense really matters a lot. In Blount's case, it wasn't just because he wanted to enrich himself. It was because the way he went about it involving foreign countries.
Yes.
You know, so.
Well, if it was just some money-making scheme like buying Western lands and selling it, you don't think that's an impeachable offense. Here's a United States politician who's buying lands and selling it.
Was it against the law?
No.
No.
But it is unseemly, isn't it? For
Well,
politicians to use office for private gain. It is unseemly. And maybe for some of us, it's so unseemly that we consider that a high crime. Who's to say what constitutes a high crime? Okay? That's like beauty in the eye of the beholder. But I agree with you. I agree with you 100% that what you're saying is, in this case, it smacks a lot of treason to contract with a foreign government to come to North America. Okay, it seems to smack of treason. Any other thoughts on impeachment? These are great. I'm glad the gears are turning. People at home, I hope you're thinking about this too. Yes, ma'am.
Just to go in a different direction. Do you kind of wonder if they hadn't stopped Blount, how big Tennessee might have become?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great what-if question. What if the plot went off? What if it worked?
To push it forward a little bit, we start getting into similar territory with Aaron Burr a little bit later on.
Yes.
Is there much of a difference between William Blount's case and the case of Aaron Burr? Can you see how much change has happened within that time frame?
There are some similarities, right? So both Aaron Burr and William Blount both tried to get Federalists on their side first. They did try to work within the system, right? We're founding fathers too. We helped build this new system. Let's see how it'll work for us. And both men, I think, are ultimately willing to do whatever it takes to expand this country westward. For certain Federalists, there are limits, okay? First and foremost, there are financial limits. We can only do so much, and only do so much so quickly. Like, don't push us to do more than we can do immediately. And I think those financial concerns come before humanitarian concerns for the Federalists. It's not that Washington and Knox, it's not that John Adams are pro-Native American. It's not that they are enlightened individuals completely. They're enlightened in a constitutional sense, a legal sense, but they're not enlightened when it comes to race relations. Okay? They're not trying to prevent wars with indigenous peoples to preserve indigenous culture in this country. It's primarily a financial concern. For Blount and for Burr, those financial concerns really don't matter. Okay? And they're able, as land speculators, people who buy real estate on the frontier, to sell to settlers, and they bring settlers from Europe. Okay? This is not meant to benefit Americans. Think about that. We're bringing poor people from Europe. We're selling them land. Where? On the frontier. Okay? Who's making out in that? Fat cats, like Blount and like Burr, are making out. who's losing. The poor Europeans are being put into this dangerous situation, and then the poor European folks are like, help us. Help us. Okay? And here's where Blount doubles down on that and says, I'm the strong man that can help you. Federal government's not going to come help your butt. It's me. It's Knoxville that's going to help you. So do what I tell you to do. And that wins out. That's where a lot of poor folks in the South get wrapped around states' rights. Like our own state government's the only one that's going to help us. It's not the federal government. It's because of these sorts of situations. Thank you all for your time. If you have any further ideas on impeachment or want to contact me whatsoever, I encourage you to reach out to me. I'm always available. Thank you all. Thank you, guys. That was good. Nathaniel, you didn't get fired up there. No passion around impeachment. You're like, impeach Biden, don't impeach Biden. I don't care.
I don't think I'll have impeachment.
You're not in love with impeachment?